Everything I write about is 100% true, and there will be times where my writing makes me sound emotionless as a sponge, but the reasons for this will be explained at a later date. This happened to me when I was 11 years old. It was a sunny Sunday in the last week of what used to be known as a 6 weeks holiday. Two of my friends and I went down to the park to muck about. Now, in this park is a gate that leads down to a public walkway across a road, and across the road is a dirt path that takes you down into the part of the woods that my mates and I called Sandy Iego. Back then, the river down there was gorgeous. Very little pollution, pebble shore, and if you knew where to look, you could find all sorts, from Coca-Cola bottles dated from the 60s, right to the coolest looking stones. It was a treasure trove. Anyway, this road was always quiet on an early Sunday afternoons, and I mean, it was like a ghost road. 3 hours could go by, and not a single car could be seen. So there we were, 3 kids with eyes full of treasure signs, and we went off through the gate. And shit happened. I got hit by a car driven by a 17-year-old lad who had just passed his test 4 days prior, and so his father, a high-ranking cop, had bought him a juicy little runner as a gift. I survived what's known as a trauma-induced full right hind amputation. In other words, my pelvis was clearly snapped in half on a 45-degree angle, and a quarter of my body was amputated on sight. My coccyx, hip, arse cheek, and of course my entire leg were literally torn off in the time it took me to blink. Shock can be a beautiful thing in these cases, and despite being wide awake and wholly aware of the whole thing, it was blissfully pain-free, something for which we can all be thankful. I had no other injuries, not so much as a scratch or even a broken nail. I needed a grand total of 11 litres of blood, a 2-day coma, several zillion surgeries, and a few other bits and bobs. How I survived this is unknown, but how little time it took me to recover is unreal. 5 months is all it took. 5 months, and I was up and about on crutches. Only for an hour or two at the max, but I was using them. 1 year later, and I was starting to train for the junior athletics for disabled people. While just 4 years after being ripped in two, I was climbing a mountain with the British Army to promote equality and awareness for all. Anyway, my accident isn't my story, but as it was at the beginning of 24 years of sheer oddness, it had to be included. And those 24 years all began when I died. No heartbeat, no pulse, no breath, yada yada, for 2 minutes and 38 seconds. That was an awfully long time for someone in my situation to be without a sign of life. I can tell you who was in the operating room, and exactly what they were doing, yet, for all intents and purposes, I was clinically dead. I remember going around that room, looking at myself, being angry that they cut off my waist-length blonde hair, and at one point, managed to knock a scalpel out onto the floor. The main surgeon, Mr. Cook, literally stopped what he was doing, looked down at the scalpel, sighed, and said, "Get back here, madam." It was as though all his patients had out-of-body experiences, and ran around his, or playing silly bastards. I've never been in an earthquake, but I imagine what happened following, that is what a quake feels like, only without the sound. The walls shook, at least they did for me, and I vividly remember losing my balance, and the next thing I know, I'm awake in my intensive care bed, telling my grandparents a joke about the breathing tube. Not 30 hours after surviving being torn in two, and I was joking around. It was normal to me back then, but now I've experienced all I have, the oddness of that in itself is quite spectacular. I couldn't tell you how much time had passed between the first oddity of mine and my waking up in my room, but I can tell you when Mr. Cook came by to dazzle me with his yo-yo skills. He just gave me this look and said, "I know what you are about, young lady." Nothing was ever said between us, but he knew. By the stars. That man somehow knew I was in that room. Was it paranormal? I don't know. But whatever it was as odd as anything could possibly get.